Hello, and welcome to episode 28 of Under Your Spell, a Willow and Tara fanfiction podcast. Before we start the show today, I just have some housekeeping I wanted to get taken care of. First of all, I want to give a huge thank you to Jo for reading Home on the last episode. Thank you, Jo, and I hope all of you listening enjoyed her read. Second, if you want to read on the show, as Jo has, please email me at underyourspellpodcast@yahoo.com. I might have something available for you, and I'd like to get you involved if you're interested in reading. Also, if you have recommendations for fan fiction stories, you can also email them at the same address, and I will take a look at them. I can't guarantee reading anything because I have to get author's permission, and some things are better read than spoken aloud, but I would really like to have any ideas from the audience because I'm always looking for new stories. Next, I want to thank everyone who has taken time to fill out the survey online about the show. It really means a lot to me. I'm very interested to know where people found the show, how many episodes they listened to, and how they keep up on updates. And I encourage everyone who has been listening to this show and hasn't filled out the survey to take a few minutes to fill it out for me. It's only 4 questions, and the link is in the show notes. For today's episode, I will be starting the story Cause and Manner, written by Just Jane 18. This story is quite long, so it's going to take more than one episode of the podcast. I hope you all enjoy it and listen to the whole story. I think it's a really well-written, in character. It messes with canon a little bit, but is still very much rooted in the Buffy universe, so I really appreciate the effort and the skill that went into writing this story. If you enjoy Cause and Manner as much as I do, please let the author know. I have her information in the show notes. And if you enjoy listening to the podcast, leave a rating and review on iTunes or on Stitcher, and any feedback you have for me personally, you can also leave in those reviews, or you can email me directly at underyourspellpodcast@yahoo.com. All the links to that stuff is in the show notes. The summary for Cause and Manner is as follows. This story is set current day, 10 years after the defeat of the first evil and destruction of Sunnydale. Events occurred as depicted in the show, with 2 major differences. Tara never came to Sunnydale, and Anya didn't die. I have made some changes in historical facts, primarily that the United States suffered a prolonged drought which devastated food supplies, followed by an economic collapse in 2008 to 2010, with significant legal and political implications. Times are hard, and unsympathetic leaders are in charge. Cause and Manner by Just Jane 18, Chapter 1, A Heart Apart. The heart lay gently in her gloved hand as she turned it carefully, evaluating each side of the external surface. Anterior, posterior, apex, and base all appeared initially unremarkable. Taking up the scalpel, she began to section through the coronary arteries that ran just beneath the exterior until her blade struck firmness. Applying more pressure with the sharp edge revealed hard yellow plaque lining the inner aspect, and nearly occluding the lumen of the left anterior descending coronary artery, also known as the Widowmaker. Placing the heart down on the surface of the cutting board, she took a longer blade and made clean cuts of equal thickness through the muscle and placed them down on the surface before her for evaluation. As suspected, a firm white scar marred the otherwise red-brown muscle tissue in the anterior wall of the heart in the area supplied by the diseased vessel she had discovered. She marveled at the simplicity of the process that had taken the life of the 52-year-old businessman whose body was lying supine on the cart next to her and whose heart was in pieces before her. Block a major artery, stop blood flow to a portion of the crucial muscle, which dies, resulting in scar tissue. a ticking bomb waiting for extreme physical exertion to strike at the most inopportune time, such as an afternoon tryst with your mistress at an expensive downtown hotel when your wife believes you to be at an out-of-town business meeting. Le Grand Mort in the middle of Le Petit Mort. When lying separate, severed from the vital connections to the body, the heart remained a fascination. Taken together with the knowledge of what it did during life, a delicate balance of electrical impulses taking spent blood into chambers and feeding it through the lungs to be oxygenated and returned to the body. That was a scientific wonder worth a lifetime of study. Deeper still, one could probe the true meaning and purpose of the human heart, how it can physically ache at hurt and loss, how it can race and skip from joy and love. Sadly, she thought, she had experienced too much of the former and not enough of the latter in her own history. The heart can still be a source of destruction even after the beat has been lost, if you are a member of the undead. So many vampires she had staked over the last 15 years, and that only a fraction of the number slain by her best friend and housemate Buffy Summers, oldest of the 100 or so current vampire slayers scattered around the world. Those hearts would never be subject to her forensic evaluation. The redhead laughed to herself, seeing how it is hard to examine dust. Willow. Dr. Rosenberg. Earth to Rosenberg. The increasingly loud male voice finally clicked in her head and brought Willow out of her deep moment of introspection. "Oh, hey, boss. Sorry, I was just thinking about the heart," Willow answered the physician who had hired her 2 years ago and had been the man in charge of the office for the last 20 years, Dr. Alan Banks. "I saw you thinking. How about actually doing instead?" The older man spoke gruffly, but with an undertone of teasing and a wry smile on his face. "We've got 10 more bodies in the incoming cooler. I need you to do at least one more autopsy today." "No problem, Chief. I'm on it. This one is straightforward coronary disease. I'll be done in a jiffy." Willow responded as she reached for the small tissue jar filled with formalin at the cutting station. After selecting the worst areas of damaged tissue, Willow Rosenberg, M.D., cut small sections of the heart and a few of the other major organs to place in the jar. These would be processed, stained, and returned on glass slides for her review under the microscope in a few days. Finishing up, she nodded to her assistant, who placed organs in a red biohazard bag which went into the main body cavity that was then loosely stitched for transport to the funeral home. Stripping off her protective plastic gown, gloves, and face shield, Willow exited the morgue and headed down the administrative hall. It had taken over a year, but she finally had a door plate identifying that the office belonged to Dr. Willow Rosenberg, Deputy Medical Examiner, and in smaller letters beneath, North Central Region, State of California. The office itself was a typical government 8x12 rectangle, and as a junior member of the staff, she had not yet earned the privilege of a window with a view, but it was her own personal space at least. A surplus metal desk and squeaky rolling chair took up most of the space not occupied by the voluminous bookshelves that lined the walls. 2 straight-backed visitor chairs sat in front of the desk, but one was stacked with papers and journals that had found themselves no place available on the overflowing shelves. "Coffee. I need an espresso badly. Preferably a direct intravenous infusion." A tall brunette slumped into the single spare chair, managing to drape herself elegantly while looking exhausted at the same time. "You'll help a friend out with that fancy machine of yours, right?" "You're my only friend here, and you know it, Elise. Go get some water and I'll grind." Willow turned to her one office indulgence, a top-of-the-line countertop espresso machine that sat on a small table in the back corner of the office. When she had started working at the department, she found the ancient break-room communal coffee pot contained a bitter, watery liquid over a layer of thick black sludge, neither of which was drinkable. She'd also found a friend in Elise Jones, another of the deputy medical examiners, with about 8 years' experience. The offer of free espresso might have had started their friendship, but Willow had found Elise to be an incredibly intelligent and savvy forensic pathologist who was willing to mentor the young redhead on things both medical and political in the office. The two had barely taken their first sip when a short-cropped, balding brown head that sat over a sour visage appeared in the doorway. "There are more cases, you two. I'm headed back to start my second." Elise didn't even turn to acknowledge the speaker, rolling her eyes at Willow to show her displeasure. "When we have taken our quick coffee break, we will both do another case, James, and it will be my third today." Willow couldn't hide her snigger as the brown-haired man left in a huff. James Pierce was a co-worker and one of the other 7 deputy medical examiners for the North Central California region. He had been with the office for 6 years and had been at a different office for 4 before moving to California. He clearly viewed himself as being in an administrative position of authority based on his experience, but the chief medical examiner had not named him, or anyone else, as the assistant chief since the state ordered office consolidation 2 years ago. James was a climber with political connections, but his work as a forensic pathologist was mediocre. "Insolent prick. Who the fuck does he think he is? I'm getting really tired of that asshat thinking he's our boss already," Elise commented coolly in contrast to her colorful word choice. Willow laughed and almost snorted out a gulp of her espresso. Elise was full of interesting contradictions. She was a brilliant forensic pathologist with a reputation as the fastest in the office, yet she never missed the smallest detail. She was strikingly beautiful in a tall, lean sort of way, but her wardrobe was utilitarian and her makeup sparse. She had married young to her college sweetheart and had 2 school-age children who she adored and who exasperated her in equal measure. And her language was legendary. She had a vocabulary that a lifelong sailor would be hard-pressed to keep up with. "I don't know what I'd do without you around here to cut the tension," Willow smiled as her friend finished up her coffee. "Let's hope neither one of us ever has to find out. I think it's safe to say we both really need these jobs, and having you around makes it enjoyable, and not just tolerable, Willow," the brunette responded kindly. "I guess we better get back down there, before James complains to the boss about me, again. I don't know why he thinks I'm such a threat. I never want to run this place." Willow pondered her friend's statements as they walked back towards the morgue. She certainly did need the job, and for more reasons than Elise understood. The money was important. She had medical school loans to pay off and other bills, but being a medical examiner gave her access to information about deaths occurring all over North and Central California, including the entire San Francisco Bay Area, Sacramento, and the central agricultural regions. Already in her 2 years here, she had identified several vampire and demon-related murders, and Buffy had been able to take Slayer action based on the information. On the books, the murders would unfortunately remain unsolved, but she felt good knowing justice had been served and further deaths prevented with her help. The 2 female medical examiners arrived at the entryway to the morgue, where several clipboards hung on the wall, each with a single sheet of paper displaying the basic pertinent information of the cases remaining to autopsy that day. Name, if known, age, if known, circumstances, if known, description of the death scene and any obvious injuries. Elise grabbed the top clipboard with a defeated sigh. Damn, domestic homicide. Looks like a strangulation out of San Jose. She looked over at the redhead. "Catch you for a late lunch, okay? This may take me a while." Willow nodded and reached for the next clipboard. Jennifer Clausen, age 42, married, no children, found hanging by a dog leash off the balcony of the townhouse she owned with her husband. Mrs. Clausen was a PhD research biologist with Farm Ag Industries, but had recently been fired. Farm Ag Industries, or PAI, was the largest corporation in California, having developed from a warehouse in Richmond rented by a couple of science geeks to become the biggest employer of high-tech chemists and biologists, as well as the employer of most agricultural workers in the state. The combination was unusual, but so was PAI. The company had developed the serum for the pacification program, used to mollify and control the laborers who performed the bulk of the work, growing, harvesting, and producing the food consumed by Americans. Following the Great Drought of '08 and '09 and subsequent economic collapse, PAI had positioned itself as the great savior of the country, providing solutions to skyrocketing food prices and severe shortages while gaining control of infrastructure of California's agricultural industry. Perhaps Mrs. Clausen was just one of the countless secondary victims of the economic collapse who could not face a jobless future and took a different way out. Just as she was about to read on the details of the scene, a hand reached over her shoulder and swiftly lifted the clipboard out of her grasp. "I'll take that case," Dr. Pierce stated confidently as he stepped towards the morgue door. "I thought you hated suicides." Willow knew she should just keep her mouth shut, but she was annoyed at him taking the clipboard away from her when there were several more cases to choose from. "I don't know what you mean, Dr. Rosenberg. I do a full range of cases, and I resent the implication that I avoid certain types, as I will now demonstrate by handling this hanging." The brown-haired man tried to look insulted as he rested the clipboard on his protruding belly. "Fine, I'll just take the next one." Willow tried to appear casual as she selected another clipboard and scanned down the page. "This motorcycle accident from Chico." James nodded as if approving the selection and moved through the door into the main autopsy suite. "Not like I needed your permission," Willow muttered to herself before following him into the morgue to start her own case. The incident with James Pierce didn't cross Willow's mind again until she was riding the BART train back to San Francisco from the office location in Oakland. She knew for a fact that he intensely disliked suicide cases and actively avoided them. He had commented on several occasions that families of the descendants often refused to accept that a loved one had killed themselves and would insist on speaking directly to the medical examiner, and he felt uncomfortable talking to family members. Willow didn't understand why he had gone into forensics. Talking to bereaved family was often difficult, but they were usually grateful that someone would take the time to speak to them and explain all the medical jargon in terms they could understand. Why, then, would James not only willingly take such a case, but literally take it out of her hands? Something in the back of her Scooby mind signaled a warning, and she decided to pay more attention to the case selection of James Pierce in the future. The redhead relaxed onto the seat, thinking about her life as the train rumbled under 135 feet of water of the San Francisco Bay. Living in the city had been an easy choice after Sunnydale was destroyed. Buffy was ready to do something else with her life other than full-time slaying, and there was no question that Willow would stay at her best friend's side wherever life took them. Dawn needed to finish high school someplace stable, and Xander had convinced Anya to settle down with the Scoobies. The hacker had modified her UC Sunnydale transcripts to allow her to immediately apply for medical school at UC San Francisco, and Buffy had finished a degree in criminalistics at San Francisco State. After the first evil had been destroyed along with their hometown, Buffy had announced she was semi-retiring. She planned to help out as needed in San Francisco, but would not work full-time as a Slayer. Most of the newly activated Slayers had gone to Cleveland with Giles and Faith, where they had set up a sort of training facility. Faith was focused on controlling the vampire and demon population at the Hellmouth, now the most active in the world. Giles was focused on identifying and training the new Slayers, as well as some new Watchers. A few months after leaving Sunnydale, Willow had come across an announcement that the city was auctioning off several old firehouses that were obsolete. She convinced Giles to pry into the remaining Watchers' Council funds to purchase the 3-story building in the Tenderloin district of the city and remodel it for their use. The top floor was now a separate apartment for Xander and Anya. The second floor held a suite in the back with bedrooms for Willow and Buffy, with a common kitchen and living space. The front had several small guest rooms with another galley kitchen and a large meeting room. The first floor held the street front office for Buffy and Xander's private investigation and security firm, and a small private office for Willow's witchy and hacker research material. The back portion was a training and weapons room, where Buffy sometimes gave self-defense classes. All in all, the trio of high school friends was doing remarkably well, or so Willow told herself. They had survived multiple apocalypses, grown into adults with careers that had purpose, and helped to raise Dawn into an accomplished young woman who was now a reporter on the crime beat with the San Francisco Chronicle. But for all that, Willow knew what was missing, at least in her life and in Buffy's. They had both dated over the years, but none of their relationships ever seemed to stick. Every man the Slayer dated backed away from her after they found out about her unusual strength and talents. The longest was a 2-year relationship with a good-looking cop who had gone so far as to offer to help Buffy with a vampire nest that had taken up residence in a small cave near a local beach. The first glimpse of rigid foreheads and fangs had sent him running. He later claimed Buffy must have given him PCP to fuel his hallucination, a charge that made the Scoobies laugh, thinking back to all the drug gang attacks the residents of Sunnydale had suffered, according to the local police. The laughter simply covered the pain of yet another failed relationship for Buffy. The redhead herself had been subject to much mirth from her friends regarding her love life. Not being able to decide which gender she was interested in hadn't helped. She had dated Oz in high school and into college, but he had left to find a way to control the werewolf, and she hadn't seen him since. She had been involved with Kennedy during the year leading up to the battle with the First, but after Sunnydale, both women had agreed the relationship didn't have a future, and they had parted amicably. Since then, medical school followed by 4 years of pathology residency hadn't given her much time to date. A few awkward dates with a very nice but shy fellow medical student named Colin had led to an uncomfortable make-out session at his apartment, where his fumbling hands and her obvious disinterest in the aspect of the relationship had encouraged her early departure for home and a decision not to go out with any more men. She had met an attractive woman at a Wicca group she had attended during residency, and they had dated for several months. They had slept together, but the sex had quickly turned more comfortable than passionate, and Willow was almost relieved when the woman had been transferred to the East Coast for her job. So here she was in the city of the gays for the last decade, and she couldn't seem to find the right woman. The sound of the train pulling into the Embarcadero station caught her attention, and she readied herself to get off 2 stops later. Maybe someday Miss Wright will walk into my life, she tried to think hopefully, but as she exited the train and headed out onto the street, the reality of her life struck again. Hard to imagine, since most people I meet now are zipped up in a body bag and rolled in on a cart. Chapter 2. Behind Bars and Gates. Tara flinched involuntarily at the harsh clang of the metal door as the lock slammed shut behind her. She kept her arms wrapped tightly around herself as the guard led her down a short hallway and deposited her in front of a second guard seated behind glass. Bulletproof, the blonde assumed. "Visitor for Maclay Donnie," the first guard called out before heading back down towards the entrance of the Sacramento County Jail. "Sign on the next line," the guard instructed, pointing at a clipboard on the counter in front of her. "No weapons, no alcohol, no drugs, no cigarettes, no food, and no prolonged touching or making out." "I'm here to see my brother." Tara could barely lift her eyes off the floor to sign her name. "Whatever. Violate the rules and you get your own cell. No waiting. Got it?" The blonde nodded and scurried through the visitor door when she heard the lock buzz open. She was immediately overwhelmed by the number of people in the cafeteria-style room. Round tables with the bases secured to the floor covered much of the space, and extra folding chairs were set up around the perimeter against the long walls. Most of the tables and chairs were occupied by women, many with children, and male inmates distinguished by the neon orange jumpsuits they wore. Many of the women were crying, as were several of the inmates. Raw, emotional pain assaulted her empathetic senses before she had a chance to place a protective barrier on her psyche. The depths of the misery brought tears to her eyes and almost sent her to her knees. A deep, centering breath came instinctually and allowed her a moment to block out the sadness and fear surrounding her from all sides before she found 2 empty chairs along the far back wall and sat down to wait for her brother. She had borrowed a car from her landlady, Mrs. Darby, a pleasant 70-year-old widow who rented her a simple over-the-garage apartment 5 years ago. She needed a car for the drive from Berkeley, and had promised the woman who was like her grandmother now a full wash and detailing on her return. During the drive she had time to think about how much to tell her older brother about her life. It had been 6 years since they had spoken, when, following her graduation from Cal with a degree in environmental economics and policy, she had refused to return home to the Maclay farm and had stayed in the Bay Area to work for a non-profit farm workers organization. Her father and brother had seen her decision as a slap in the face and severed all contact, not that there had been much since she had left home for college 4 years previously. She had discovered the lie behind her father's insistence that she would manifest a demon aspect not long after her 20th birthday. Years of verbal abuse and occasional physical discipline following her mother's death had left her shy and timid, but her desire to learn more about her Wiccan heritage had led her to find her aunt, who had left the area long before her mother's passing. The older woman had explained she had little ability herself, but that Tara had likely inherited her mother's significant natural talents, and that had always frightened her father. Any demon story was likely just a contrivance to keep her working at the farm under his control. She had left 2 months later and moved to Berkeley to start at the university. The truth was, Tara loved and missed the farm. She was an early riser by nature and found caring for the animals and growing crops provided a physical connection to the land and spiritual fulfillment as a Wiccan. Her empathetic nature craved solace, and the life of a farmer certainly provided that in abundance. But she could not abide the personal abuse of her father or the treatment of the migrant workers necessary to bring in a profitable crop each year. Then the drought had come, and the conditions for the workers got even worse. They were living in inhumane conditions and dying from dehydration and, ironically, starvation. When the migrants revolted against the huge corporate farms, the big money stepped in and started a public relations campaign centered around the violent criminal illegals who were endangering the already depleted food supplies and making prices skyrocket for ordinary, real Americans. Then the stock market crashed, the banks collapsed, and the economy headed into depression. The elections of 2010 saw a wave of far-right, anti-government, anti-immigrant conservatives elected to local, state, and national positions, mostly under the banner of the American Patriots' First Party, APFP. The Democratic president became an immediate lame duck and could do little to stop the deluge of legislation that followed. The APFP created a massive border police force, wrote strict deportation laws, and built the Great Wall of the Americas along much of the Mexican border at enormous expense. Not surprisingly, immigration, both legal and illegal, decreased. The APFP claimed the success of their harsh policies while ignoring the reality that no one wants to come to a country with an unemployment rate of 22%, no civil liberties, and high crime. With the Liberals in disarray, the 2012 election simply solidified the hold of the APFP on Congress and placed an ultra-conservative friend in the White House. Tara had persevered working for the farm workers organization, but donations to the nonprofit were slim, and that translated into little income. She started supplementing her meager pay with aura readings, mostly charging rich wives who wanted to know if their husbands were cheating. She wasn't proud of using her heritage to make money, but it allowed her to spend her time helping people who had so few on their side. Then the pacification program started. Suddenly, the corporate farms needed fewer workers, and by the evidence to date, soon they wouldn't need to hire any. She shuddered to think of what was said about the pacified workers, how they were zombies without emotion who would work until they dropped unless ordered to stop for water and food breaks by the farm managers. That was why she was here, waiting in this room filled to the brim with hopelessness. Despite all that had gone on in the past, Donnie was still her brother. He had called in desperation, but she would hear him out and do what she could to help him avoid the possibility of pacification. When he appeared at the inmate door, Tara had to stifle a gasp. Donnie looked at least a decade older than a blue-green shiner over his left eye. She stood to get his attention and saw him smile for a second before he tried to raise his hands and was reminded of the cuffs that bound them. When he approached her, Tara wasn't sure what to do, deciding on a quick hug before sitting again. "Thanks for coming. I wasn't sure you would, but I didn't have anyone else to call," Donnie started. "I don't mind, Donnie. But what about Dad? Couldn't he help you get you bail?" Donnie looked at the floor between their chairs. "He won't come. I called him when I got arrested, and he said not to call him again, that he wouldn't be able to help a druggie. He said he can't leave the farm anyway, with the corporations always trying to sabotage things to get him to sell." Tara found herself shaking her head lightly. Her father had always prized his discipline and enforced strict behavior with severe consequences. Apparently Donnie had crossed one of his many imaginary lines and was now not worthy of assistance. Now Donald McClay Sr. had succeeded in driving away both of his children. "What happened to get you in here?" Tara asked softly, leaning forward when her brother began speaking quietly. "I was driving to see a friend in town. I stopped for gas and had driven another mile or so when all of a sudden there were 3 cop cars, 2 in front of me and 1 coming up behind. They searched me and found a baggie with powder in my wallet, and that gave them the excuse to search my car. They found a kilo wrapped and tucked into the spare tire in the trunk." Suddenly, the sandy-haired man placed his cuffed hands on Tara's knees. "I can handle the baggie possession charge, sis. I kinda deserve that. But the stuff in the trunk was a plant. I ain't no dealer." Tara willed herself to relax and placed her hands over her brother's. "What can I do, Donnie? I want to help, but I don't have any money. Is there someone I can contact for you? Friends, maybe?" "They can't help. Most of them don't have jobs. I just don't know why someone would do this to me, set me up like that." Donnie's voice had risen to the point that one of the guards started to come over. Tara sent out a trickle of calming energy through their linked hands. Donnie quieted and then squinted for a moment before sitting up with a grin on his face. "Magic. You could do some witchy thing and spring me out of here, right?" Tara looked at him sadly. "That's not my kind of magic, Donnie." Suddenly, the anger and unpredictability she remembered from childhood was back. "Fine, then just leave me here to rot. I don't know what I was thinking calling you. You were never anything but a worthless weirdo." Tara sighed and started to get up to leave. "Oh God, Tara, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. Please don't go." The anger dissipated as fast as it had started, and now Donnie was crying softly in front of her. "It's this place. It's terrible. I can't sleep. I had to fight someone last night. That's how I got this shiner." The siblings sat facing each other, neither speaking for several minutes. Finally, a guard came by and tapped Donnie on the shoulder. 5 minutes. Donnie looked up at the guard and then at Tara. "My trial's in 6 weeks since I can't make bail. If there's anything you can do." Tara reached up and touched her brother on the cheek. "I'll try, Donnie. I'll come up with something any way I can." "I know you'll try, sis. You were always good at that way. Listen, if I get convicted on everything, I'm facing a minimum of 25 years at San Quentin. I can't do that kind of time in that place. It makes the jail here look like kindergarten. They'll probably offer me a pacification program instead of prison." Donnie stood up as the guard came back to take him to his cell. "I guess in a way it would be like just going back to work on the farm, right?" Tara stood up and gave him another quick hug. "Don't do it, Donnie. Not pacification. You don't know what I've heard about those people." The guard held Donnie by the elbow now, leading him away as he spoke over his shoulder. "I'm sorry I treated you so bad when we were growing up, Tara. You deserved better." The occult shop Anya managed was well off the beaten path, literally. A quiet street turned into an alley at the end of which was a vine-covered wooden gate containing a crescent-shaped carving. A small sign announced, "The Waxing Moon," and below, "Friends enter." If you ventured on through the gate, a hidden courtyard with statues of the goddesses and fountains amid growing flowers and herbs led to a surprisingly spacious shop at the back. After voicing her displeasure loudly in the middle of several crystal and metaphysical bookstores around town that they were cheap knockoffs, Anya had found the Waxing Moon to serve the real magical community in the Bay Area, as well as offering nice products and gifts for the lucky, non-magical customers who wandered in. She had started part-time and had quickly taken over as the weekday manager when the out-of-town owner saw how sales had increased on Anya's shifts. When the chime rang signaling someone had entered the store early on a Monday, the ex-demon assumed the new arrival was probably a tourist. The early week was usually quiet and allowed her to catch up on internet orders from the weekend and restock. She called out a greeting from her office with the neutral, "Let me know if I can help you with anything," to which she received no response. Several minutes later, Anya realized the store was quiet, but she had not heard the door chime again, indicating a departure. Now, feeling vaguely annoyed, she strode into the main shop area, to find a young blonde seated on the floor near the bookshelves, with a volume on masking and glamour spells open in her lap. The ex-demon went from annoyed to angry when she saw the exposed pages of the expensive book were wrinkled and the ink running from a constant stream of tears that flowed down the cheeks of the blonde and had clearly been dripping into her lap for some time. "You will have to buy that now, to pay for the damage." The young blonde leapt to her feet, ungainly attempting to balance while at the same time wiping the tears from her face. She looked at the shopkeeper with fearful eyes and then back down to the ground where the book lay open. "I'm so sorry, I didn't even realize," the blonde started, when the combination of her emotional state and sudden jump up from the floor combined to temporarily deprive her brain of sufficient oxygen to remain conscious and standing. "Oh, no, you don't. No passing out in the shop," Anya tried to shout, but could only reach out her arms to slow the descent of the young woman to the floor. "Fainting isn't good for business." Tara noticed the calming scent of sandalwood in the air before she opened her eyes. When she did, she had no idea where she was, but the surroundings were comfortable and soothing. She heard water flowing in the background and saw a table covered with a variety of dried herbs in various stages of packaging. "Good, you're awake. Are you injured in some way? Do you have a medical condition? Should we call an ambulance?" The speaker was a concerned-looking woman with shoulder-length light brown hair that Tara now recognized as the shopkeeper who had startled her earlier. Where am I? How did I get here?" Tara could not imagine the small woman could have moved her on her own, and she did not recognize where she was. On top of that, she was stuttering, something she rarely did anymore. "Xander, get in here. She's awake and trying to speak." A dark man appeared in the doorway a moment later and smiled at her. "Hi, you had us worried. I'm Xander, and that is Anya, my wife," the man indicated with the gesture of his hand. "She called me and said a woman had passed out in the shop, and I came over and moved you here, to the couch in the prep room. I hope that is okay." Tara sat up and relaxed into the seat. "Yes, thank you. That was very kind." "Can I get you a glass of water?" Xander asked. "I don't want to bother you anymore." Tara wasn't sure she could stand up yet. She still felt weak and overwhelmed. "It's water, in a glass. No trouble. I'll be right back." The dark-haired man smiled and disappeared through the doorway. "Well, that hasn't happened to me before, at least not since Sunnydale. Of course, there you probably would have fallen over dead in the shop, not been just unconscious." The woman, now identified as Anya, looked away with misty eyes. "I sort of miss those days sometimes. It was exciting." Don't frighten the customer on, Xander had returned with the promised water. Oh, she's not a customer, are you? Anya focused back on Tara, patting her arm as she spoke. Xander's eyebrows knitted a little in confusion. I thought she was looking at a book out front, honey. She was, but she's a witch. A real one, if I'm not mistaken, right? Whatever your name is. Tara was completely thrown by the woman's comments. Tara, I'm Tara. How did you know? When I touched you, you were falling and I helped you not hurt yourself, Anya grinned. I don't have any power anymore, but I can still tell when someone else does, and you have power. I don't. Well, not much, really. I just need to look for something that might help my brother. That's why I was reading the spell book. Suddenly, the blonde remembered the volume she had been reading when she was overcome with grief and had turned the pages with her tears. The spell book! I'm so sorry I damaged it. Of course I'll pay for it. How much is it? The volume was from 1929, an original. It will cost me hundreds to replace it, Anya announced. Tara slumped back into the couch. Hundreds? Oh, goddess, I don't have that kind of money. She looked down into her lap as she tried to hold back the tears in her eyes. I don't really have any money. Well, that's just great. What am I supposed to do? That will definitely cut into my profits. Anya had thrown her hands up as she spoke. Not helping Anya, Xander tried to shush his wife as he sat down on the couch next to the blonde. Can I ask, what did you need the spell for? Tara sensed the kindness in the man next to her and didn't see that she had anything to lose. I was looking for glamour to get my brother out of jail. He's been arrested for something he didn't do, and I'm so scared of what might happen to him. The blonde looked up at the man and saw her sad expression return. I was crying out there because I knew I couldn't use a spell to help him escape. I don't have that kind of ability, and it wouldn't be right. I just don't know what else to do. Xander paused for a moment before reaching into his wallet and taking out a business card. Come to this address tomorrow around 6 o'clock. You can talk to my partner and me about your brother's case. Maybe there's something we can do to help it if what you say is true. Tara looked at the simple white card in her hand with the name Chosen Investigations and Security Services, an address in the city, and a telephone number. Thank you for this, Xander, but you know I can't pay. As it is, I'm going to have to figure out how to reimburse you for the book, Tara stated as she tried to return the card, only to have the man gently push her hand back. Keep it. Come tomorrow. We work on sort of a sliding scale for payment, as in, if you have money, you pay. Xander looked up at Anya. As for the book damage, aren't you still looking for some reliable weekend help? Someone who actually knows about magic? Maybe Tara could work some shifts. The blonde's mouth fell open. You'd give me a job? Here? That would be amazing. I could work whatever hours you needed on the weekend. Anya scowled for a moment at her husband before looking at the blonde witch. Do you know herbs? Tara got up and scanned the work table behind the ex-demon for a moment. Most of these mixes are heavy on the jasmine and lavender. Good for baths and sleep, and most people like them for pleasant scent, really. As the blonde walked toward the far end of the long table, she started to blush. These mixes are different. Ginseng, hibiscus, saffron. These are, well, aphrodisiacs. Afro-whats? The dark-haired man looked confused. Anya laughed loudly. Sex, Xander. I was working on the Love and Lust collections this morning. The shopkeeper looked at the embarrassed blonde, still gleeful. You're hired. And that concludes the first 2 chapters of Cause and Manner. I hope you enjoyed the story so far. It's kind of a slow beginning, but like I said, it's a long story, so it builds up, and unfortunately I can only record so much at one time. I also apologize if my reading was a little rough. I'm still getting into the story myself. But as always, thanks for listening. If you guys have any feedback, any comments, any questions, you can follow the show on Twitter, follow the show on Tumblr. You can email me at underyourspellpodcast@yahoo.com. And also, if you like the show, if you listen to the show, leave a review and rating on iTunes or on Stitcher if you listen via Stitcher. And take a few minutes to take that really short 4-question survey if you haven't already. And finally, if you like the story itself, I recommend telling the author. Fan fiction authors don't get as much credit as they should for what they write. And when you get something good like this, you should always return the favor and give them some feedback. The author of Cause and Manor, Just Jane 18, can be contacted via her fanfiction page, and I have a link for that in the show notes. So please take a moment, click on it, tell her you like the story. Once again, thanks for listening, and until next time, take care.